Let's jump right in. Today, we are exploring a deeply thought-provoking explainer based on a philosophical text by Xu Feng titled The Revelation of Zero Degree, published back in March 2022. We're going to take a really structured journey together, starting way out in the harsh, freezing reality of the physical world, and then we're going to use that exact physical reality to unlock some incredibly deep psychological and spiritual concepts. The author actually takes the literal laws of nature and maps them right onto human consciousness. So get ready, because this is about to fundamentally change how you look at the temperature around you.
So I've got a slightly weird question for you right off the bat. What does a frozen vegetable have in common with spiritual enlightenment? Yeah, I know, it sounds totally absurd at first glance, but honestly, this is exactly how the author bridges that massive gap between our mundane, everyday reality and the absolute highest levels of personal evolution. We're going to use that frustrating, relatable experience of finding a ruined vegetable in a cold storage room to perfectly illustrate the complex mechanics behind how our minds, our emotions, and ultimately our spirits actually transform.
Section 1. The Literal Freezing Point.
Xu Feng kicks off this text with some very grounded observations drawn right from his experience living in the extreme freezing climate of northern Canada, and it all centers on one specific number, 0 degrees Celsius. Think about it. If the temperature stays right at 0 or drops anywhere below it, the snow on the ground absolutely refuses to melt. It just stays stubbornly entirely solid. But the very second that temperature rises, I mean literally even if it creeps up by just 1 single degree above 0, the melting process instantly begins. 0 degrees isn't just an arbitrary number on a thermometer. It's an absolute, immovable boundary line in the physical world. To bring this point home, he shares a great story about his own cold storage room. He usually keeps it around 2 to 4 degrees above 0 just to preserve his food. But, during those brutal Canadian winters when it's minus 30 outside, the temperature inside that storage room can easily slip below 0. And when it does, the vegetables freeze, they get completely ruined, and they become totally inedible. Through this super relatable anecdote, Xu Feng establishes 0 degrees as this literal, binary marker. It's the exact dividing line between solid and liquid, between preserved food and ruined food, and ultimately it's the line between life and death. Below 0, that means death for the vegetables. Above 0, that means life.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 2. The Mind's Critical Point.
Right here is where the explainer completely pivots from talking about physicalized directly into the realm of human psychology. You see, in physics, there's this term called the critical point. It's the exact threshold where a qualitative change happens in a substance. Think of water turning to ice or ice melting into water. The fundamental nature of the thing just completely changes. Well, the author's core thesis here is that he maps this exact physical law directly onto our mental states. Just like water has a critical point, human beings have emotional and psychological critical points. Basically, every single one of us has a personal 0 degree mark.
So what does that actually look like in our day-to-day lives? Let's look at psychological thresholds. The text points out that if you insult or criticize someone, well, they might tolerate it for a little bit. But once those insults cross their specific threshold, their personal 0 degree point, a sudden, destructive, qualitative change happens. Their tolerance instantly snaps into anger, or maybe even violence. And the exact same thing goes for mental pressure. A person can carry a really heavy load, but the moment that pressure exceeds the critical point they can physically and mentally bear, their mental state fundamentally shifts. Often, that leads to severe depression or even suicidal thoughts. Pushing past that invisible psychological 0 degree line literally alters the state of the human mind.
Section 3. Evolving Beyond the Threshold.
Now that we kind of understand how this works with our temporary psychological states, the author scales this concept way up. According to the text, crossing specific, massive critical points is actually what elevates life into entirely different realms. It's almost like an evolutionary ladder. The text states that when an animal's consciousness surpasses a critical point, it becomes human. And taking it even a step further, the source posits that when a human's consciousness surpasses its ultimate critical point, they are elevated into higher divine realms, becoming immortals or Buddhas. So in this view, spiritual evolution is strictly governed by the exact same physics of the critical point.
And this brings us to a really compelling conflict that the text presents. Why do so many people give up on their personal or spiritual cultivation? Honestly, so many people spend years meditating, practicing self-improvement, or following spiritual disciplines, but eventually, they get discouraged, they feel lost, and they just quit. Why is that? If they're putting in all that work, why aren't they changing?
Well, the crucial point is this. The author argues that even tens of thousands of years of practice mean absolutely nothing if your life evolution remains below that critical point. If you don't actually cross the 0 degree mark,
You experience zero qualitative change. You stay exactly the same person. The text points out to real tragedy here, which is that a lot of people quit when they are, literally, maybe just one single step away from crossing that threshold. It's like they dropped below zero just seconds before the ice was about to melt. And without crossing that line, the transformation simply cannot occur.
Section 4. The ripening fruit analogy.
To make this pretty daunting process feel a bit more tangible, the author introduces a really beautiful natural metaphor. Listen to this quote right from the text. Fruits fall off when ripe. If the stem doesn't fall, it's because the fruit is still growing. It's such a grounding perspective, isn't it? If you're out there practicing, learning, and trying to improve, but you just haven't seen that massive qualitative change yet, if you haven't crossed your critical point, it doesn't mean you're failing. It simply means the process of growth is still ongoing. The fruit just isn't ripe yet. You know, you can't force the stem to fall before the fruit is ready, just like you can't force the critical point before your internal temperature has truly risen.
The source then objectively presents this massive, overarching view of existence entirely based on this temperature gauge. Everything, according to the author, hovers around this 0-degree point. It dictates the entire cycle of existence. So if a state of being remains perpetually below zero, the text equates that with death, or what it refers to as living in hell. Conversely, if a state of being can be maintained perpetually above zero, it's equated with life, paradise, and eternal life. It is a very stark, very binary way of viewing the ultimate outcomes of our spiritual and conscious evolution.
Section 5. The Pivot of Change. And now we reach the abstract climax of this explainer. The text concludes with a major philosophical assertion, which we're reporting objectively here. The greatest creator is the universe's ultimate 0-degree point. The author states that the greatest creator is the absolute pivot and the origin of all movement and change. According to this specific framework, absolutely all transformations in the nature of life have to pass through this ultimate 0-degree point. Without passing through that specific origin, no true change in the nature of life can ever occur. It is basically the universal bottleneck for all qualitative transformation.
So as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to ponder in your own life. Based on everything we've unpacked, from the ice refusing to melt, to the ripening fruit, to those invisible psychological triggers in our minds, what is your internal temperature right now? And how close are you to crossing your own critical point? Are you maybe just one step away from a major qualitative change? Don't stop just before the ice melts. Keep growing, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.